These are two examples of culturally relevant decks. Culturally relevant or postmodern decks pull up on contemporary versus modern sensibilities. The idea is that we've been through three epochs, at least that we can know of. There's pre-modernity, which is some of the symbolism of tarot arises from modernity, which when tarot arises itself, sort of as a reactionary movement against the deus ex machina, ghost in the machine, mechanization of the world, looking at everything through clockworks and science and denial of the supernatural. Tarot kind of comes in as a reactionary force against that. And then postmodernity, where, you know, we start to deconstruct and say, well, that's one way of knowing the scientific model, because you can, like Kant said, you can never know a thing in itself. You can never get at essences. You can only look at behaviors. Through science, you cannot prove the existence of God, but nor can you prove the existence of love, or hope, or greed, or hate. You can show how hateful actions happen, and maybe loving actions happen, but you can't prove the existence of things that people go to war for, live and die for. So postmodernity also points out about issues of power, control, gender, and language, and how these things shape our realities. So obviously an interesting piece that you can see right away with the postmodern or culturally relevant deck is some of them are round, which, you know, the idea is get away from these circles. And so sometimes we'll talk about, you know, there's reversed cards and upright meanings. Well, you can have moon phases, you know, is it waxing or waning, is it gibbous or whatnot, and so maybe a card only has 3/4 of its normal full meaning versus a full 100%. So maybe, you know, if the Fool is, she's a little off, then maybe, you know, she has naivete, she has innocence, but a touch of naivete that's really working against her as well. And they often do a good job about incorporating underrepresented genders, usually women. Ironically, even though Pamela Coleman Smith, you know, does author the Rider-Waite-Smith, it still has a lot of male figures that are very powerful. All the pages look like they're males. Crowley actually has, you know, interracial marriage and things like this that are kind of racy for 1937. But obviously this is stuff that, you know, becomes much more to the fore in culturally relevant decks. There's even an undermining of hierarchy, but also real quick, you know, also there's different types of groups. For example, you'll get tribal things such as Native American, Celtic, African American, and so on. These aspects, there's even more modern tribes, for example, or contemporary tribes, I should say, to keep with our language system here, like there's the gay tarot and things like this. So those aspects. There's also undermining of traditional hierarchies. So let me span out here. Oops, sorry. Oh, it's not willing to do that. So, for example, with these decks, you have the daughter, the son, the priestess, and the shaman, instead of the traditional page, knight, queen, king kind of motif. And so obviously it kind of takes sort of a different twist. We haven't got there yet in the sword suit, but we'll look forward to seeing the seer, the seeker for the knight, the sibyl, and the sage as the courts. And so basically we see those kinds of shifts that go on with the culturally relevant and postmodern kinds of decks. These offer different twists and different ideas, and so even if these are ideas that we may not be open to, they can be very helpful. Also, when working with certain underrepresented groups, can feel a lot better. I remember working with a woman who was African American, but I didn't realize this until after I sent her an email. And basically, I presented her a Sacred Rose Tarot card, where I went ahead and showed her a very white person and said, "This is you." Oh, I felt pretty dumb. So, you know, these are things. She took it all very well in stride, but it, you know, it was something that quite bothered me. I mean, sometimes we have to look at those issues. We have to look at who maybe we are excluding. And so that's what culturally relevant postmodern decks do. They challenge our sense of what is right, wrong, formal, informal. I remember being in this one metaphysical shop where this gentleman went on he was an older guy, he went on a rant to us all about, certain decks were inappropriate because there never was a Native American deck. The Native Americans didn't do tarot. Well, that's true, but neither did the gypsies. We project that onto them. Tarot wasn't considered for occult purposes until, 1776, the time of the American Revolution. So, we do need to be fluid with these concepts. It's more about the symbol systems and the reactionary element of talking back and disputing and deconstructing modernity that we find in making place for spirit in an increasingly informal and impersonal world. And so aspects like the Mother Peace deck, it does have its place. The World Spirit Tarot does have its place, or a Celtic, or a Native American, or any of these kinds of things. And so if these kinds of issues are front and center for you, then the culturally relevant / postmodern school of interpretation may be something that's quite up your alley.